Could I just take what's left in that bag? I haven't eaten since yesterday. That was what she said, standing in the underground parking garage of the Harrington Tower under the flickering fluorescent light, holding a torn garbage bag with both hands. Her voice was steady, not begging, just asking the way someone asks for directions to the nearest bus stop. Vivienne Aldridge heard those words and stopped walking. She had just come from the 52nd floor. 3 hours of board meeting. Her heels hurt. Her driver was waiting by the car. In her left hand she carried a takeout bag from the lunch that had been brought in. Smoked salmon on brown bread. A small cup of butternut squash soup, most of which she hadn't touched because she hadn't had the appetite to eat anything since the quarterly projections came back worse than expected. The woman standing 3 feet away from her was perhaps 30, perhaps older. It was hard to tell. Her jacket was gray and too thin for October in Halifax. Her hair was pulled back with what looked like a rubber band from a grocery bundle. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She just watched Vivienne with dark, still eyes waiting for an answer. Vivienne should have kept walking. That was what she told herself afterward. She should have said sorry and kept walking, because she was 51 years old, and she had learned, slowly and then all at once, that kindness extended to strangers in parking garages was not something her husband would approve of. Not something that fit inside the shape her life had taken over the past 2 decades. Not something the wife of Lawrence Aldridge was supposed to do. Instead she held out the bag. "There's soup," she said, "and bread, it's still warm." The woman looked at the bag for a moment, then at Vivienne. "Thank you," she said, and she took it and she didn't look away while she did it. That was the thing that stayed. Not the taking, the looking. Vivienne got into the car. The driver pulled out of the garage without a word. She watched the woman in the side mirror until the garage entrance disappeared behind them. She didn't think about it again for 11 days. The second time Vivienne Aldridge saw her, it was raining. She was standing outside the entrance to the Halifax Regional Library on Spring Garden Road. Not inside, not sheltered under the awning. Just standing on the sidewalk letting the rain come down on her. Because the security guard had told her she couldn't come in without shoes that were fully intact. Vivienne heard this as she was walking up the steps, heard the guard's voice and then a quieter voice answering. And when she turned she saw the same woman from the garage. Same jacket, different rubber band in her hair. Vivienne stopped again. "Excuse me," she said to the guard. "She's with me." The guard looked at Vivienne, then at the woman, then at the small gold brooch on Vivienne's coat lapel. The one with the Aldridge Foundation engraving that her mother-in-law had given her 20 years ago and that she wore not because she liked it, but because it opened doors. And he stepped back. Inside they sat at a table near the periodicals section. Vivienne bought 2 coffees from the small cafe on the ground floor. She came back and set one in front of the woman and sat across from her. "I'm Vivienne," she said. "I know who you are," the woman said. "Your picture is in the business section of the Chronicle Herald about once a month." She said it without sarcasm. "Just as a fact, what's your name?" Vivienne asked. The woman wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "Petra," she said, and then after a pause, "Petra Aldridge." The cafe noise continued around them. A child somewhere in the children's section was reading something out loud. The rain hit the high windows. Vivienne sat very still. "That's my last name," she said. "I know," said Petra. "It was my mother's last name too before she died." Vivienne had been married to Lawrence Aldridge for 23 years. She knew the family the way you know a house you've lived in for a long time. The layout of every room, the places where the floor creaks, the window that sticks in July, the smell of the basement after rain. She knew Lawrence's older sister Margaret, who had moved to London in the 1990s, and only came back for Christmas and funerals. She knew Lawrence's mother Dorothea. Though Dorothea had died 4 years ago, leaving behind a house in Chester Basin and a set of instructions that no one had ever fully followed. She knew about the cousin in Calgary who was never spoken about at dinner. She knew where the money came from and where it was going and what the family had done to get it to the right place at the right time. She thought she knew. "Your mother," Vivienne said slowly. "What was her name?" "She was born Kathleen Aldridge," Petra said. "Before she married, her married name was Kathleen Dowd. She died 18 months ago in Dartmouth. She had a stroke. She was 53 years old." Vivienne said nothing. She was counting years in her head. "She was Lawrence's cousin," Petra continued. "Second cousin. From the Chester Basin branch of the family. The one that got nothing." "I didn't know there was a Chester Basin branch," Vivienne said, though even as she said it she felt the discomfort of the lie. Not that she was lying to Petra, but that she might be lying to herself. "Most people in the main family made sure not to know," Petra said. She wasn't angry. That was the strangest part. Her voice was level the way the floor of a room is level, measured, reliable. "My mother grew up without much. She told me stories about her grandmother, who was a sister of the original Harland Aldridge, the one who built the first company. The family split in the 1950s. The main family went to Halifax, the Chester Basin branch stayed where they were and didn't inherit anything. And she never contested that? She tried once. She was 22. She went to a lawyer in Dartmouth and he told her she'd need money to fight money and she didn't have any, so she stopped. Petra looked at her coffee. She got a letter 2 weeks after that, from Dorothea Aldridge, your mother-in-law, telling her not to pursue it. Vivienne thought about Dorothea, the way she ran things, the guest lists she curated, the way she had once, very quietly, ended a conversation at a dinner party by placing her hand on the arm of someone who was talking too much and simply saying, in that soft, precise voice of hers, "I think that's enough of that." What did the letter say exactly? I don't know. My mother never showed it to me. She burned it. Petra looked up, but she told me about it before she died. She told me a lot of things before she died. I think she wanted someone to carry it even if it went nowhere. Even if I just ended up carrying it alone in a parking garage with someone's leftover lunch. She said that last part without bitterness. Maybe a little tiredness. The kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one bad night but from many years of bad nights accumulated into something that just feels like ordinary life. Why did you tell me your name? Vivienne asked, when you could have just said thank you and left. Petra was quiet for a moment. Because you looked at me, she said, in the garage. Most people look through, you looked at me. She paused. And because I've been in this city for 3 months with nothing and no one, and I've been trying to figure out if it's worth saying anything to anyone, and I decided that if the same person gave me food twice, I'd take it as a sign. Vivienne Aldridge did not go home that night and tell her husband. She thought about it. She sat in the kitchen of their house on Jubilee Road, the granite counter, the good knives, the row of cookbooks she never opened, and she drank a glass of water, and she thought about Lawrence, who would be home by 7, who would hang his coat on the second hook from the left, who would ask how her day went while opening the fridge. And she thought about what she would say if she told him, and then she thought about what his face would look like when she said the name Kathleen Dowd. She thought she already knew that face. There had been other moments over the years, small ones. A name mentioned at a family gathering that caused a particular stillness to descend over the room. A question about Dorothea's old correspondence that was deflected so smoothly, she hadn't noticed the deflection until much later. A line in Lawrence's grandfather's will that she had read once and never been able to find again in the filing cabinet where the family documents were kept. She didn't say anything that night. She met Petra again 3 days later, at a Tim Hortons on Quinpool Road. She had told Lawrence she was meeting a colleague from the foundation. Tell me what you're looking for, Vivienne said. Specifically, recognition, Petra said. Not money, recognition that my grandmother was defrauded out of her share of the original family estate in 1953. That Dorothea Aldridge knew about it and used it as leverage to keep the Chester Basin branch quiet. And that my mother died without ever having her existence acknowledged by the people who were supposed to be her family. She paused. That's what I want. I want someone to say out loud that she existed. That we existed. Vivienne sat with that for a while. There would be legal implications, she said. I'm not looking to sue anyone. Even so, something like this, I know, Petra said. I know what it does. That's why I'm not going to the press or a lawyer or showing up at the Aldridge Foundation's annual gala with a sign. Something shifted in her expression. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. I thought you were different from them. Maybe I was wrong. It wouldn't be the first time I read someone wrong. She started to push back her chair. Wait, Vivienne said. Petra stopped. I need to look at some things first, Vivienne said. I need to understand what I'm dealing with before I can help you with anything. Give me 2 weeks. The filing cabinet in the study on the 3rd floor of the house on Jubilee Road was locked. It had always been locked. Lawrence kept the key on his key ring, with the car keys and the office keys, and Vivienne had never asked him about it, because there had been no reason to ask, and because in 23 years of marriage, she had learned that some doors in a shared life stay closed by mutual unspoken agreement. She found the key one Tuesday morning, when Lawrence left his key ring on the kitchen counter, while he went back upstairs to get his phone. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the keys for a long time. Then she went to the junk drawer and found a piece of modeling clay that her daughter had left there during a visit 2 summers ago, and she made an impression of the small brass key, and she put the key ring back exactly where it was. The locksmith on Roby Street didn't ask questions. He made a copy in 4 minutes and charged her $11. What she found inside the cabinet, in a manila folder at the back of the second drawer, between a folder of old tax documents and a folder of insurance policies, was a set of letters. There were 7 of them, all written by Dorothea Aldridge, spanning the years between 1989 and 2006, all addressed to someone identified only as Kathleen. 4 of them were curt and formal, managing expectations, reminding the recipient of agreements made. 2 were what Vivienne could only describe as threatening, not with violence but with the precise and elegant threat of social and legal obliteration, the kind of threat someone wields when they have lawyers on retainer and the other person does not. And one, the last one, dated 2006, was something else entirely. In it, Dorothea wrote, "You have made the same mistake your mother made, which is believing that loudness is the same as strength. The Aldridge family has endured because we understood that what is not spoken cannot be used against you. I suggest you apply this wisdom before you exhaust what little goodwill remains. Consider this the last letter I intend to write. Below that, in a different handwriting added later, in pencil, barely legible, was a single line that Vivienne had to hold the paper up to the window to read. She sent money, for $200. To make me stop. I took it because Petra was sick and I had nothing else. I'm so sorry. Vivienne sat on the floor of the study for a long time after reading that. She called her daughter that evening. Charlotte, who was 26, who lived in Toronto, who had her father's jaw and her grandmother's sharp eyes. And Vivienne's habit of going very quiet when she was thinking hard about something. She didn't tell Charlotte everything, not yet. She just said she had found some old family documents that were bothering her. And Charlotte, who was doing her articling year at a litigation firm on Bay Street, and who had been, for as long as Vivienne could remember, the one person in the family who asked questions when everyone else was choosing silence, said, "What kind of documents?" "Letters," Vivienne said. "From Grandma Dorothea." There was a pause. "To who?" "To someone who should have been part of this family and wasn't." Another pause. Then, "How long have they been hidden?" "Decades. Does Dad know?" "I think so," Vivienne said. She could hear Charlotte breathing on the other end of the line. Then her daughter said, "Mom, are you safe?" It was such a simple question. Such a strange question from her daughter about her own home. "Yes," Vivienne said, and then because it was true, "I just need a little time to figure out what to do." Lawrence came home at 7:30. He hung his coat on the second hook. He went to the fridge. He asked how her day went. "Fine," she said. "Long. The foundation is reviewing the grant applications." He nodded and poured himself a glass of wine. And they made dinner together, the way they always did. And they talked about Charlotte's case, load in the renovation on the neighbor's house, and a documentary he'd seen recommended on television. And Vivienne listened to him, and answered him. And handed him things when he asked, and all of it felt like standing inside a room she had lived in for 23 years. And seeing for the first time that the walls were not what she had thought they were made of. 2 weeks later, Vivienne met Petra at the library again. She brought the letters, photocopied the originals back in the cabinet. She slid them across the table. Petra looked at them for a long time. She didn't touch them, just read. When she reached the last one, the one with the pencil note in the margin, she closed her eyes and sat very still. "She never told me," she said finally. "About the money. She was protecting you," Vivienne said. "She was ashamed of something she did to survive. That's different from doing something wrong." Petra opened her eyes. They were dry. She was past the kind of grief that needed tears, Vivienne thought. She was in the other kind, the deep still kind that just lives in you. "What do you want to do with this?" Petra asked. "I want to help you," Vivienne said. "But I need you to understand what that means for me. You'd be going against your husband. And everything his family built." "Yes. Why would you do that?" Vivienne thought about this. She had been thinking about it for 2 weeks, in the kitchen, in the car, lying awake next to Lawrence at 2 in the morning listening to him. Breathe the deep uncomplicated sleep of someone who has made peace with all his choices. "Because I have a daughter," she said. "And I've spent 23 years teaching her that who you are matters more than what you have. And I found out 2 weeks ago that I've been living inside a lie that someone else built, and I let them build it because it was comfortable, and that's on me." She paused. "I don't want to teach my daughter one thing and be another." What happened over the next 6 weeks was not dramatic. It didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom or a confrontation in the hallway of the house on Jubilee Road. It happened in conversations, in documents, in a meeting that Vivienne arranged at the offices of a law firm that Lawrence did not use, between Petra and a partner who specialized in estate and inheritance disputes, and Charlotte, who flew in from Toronto on a Friday evening and who sat across from Petra and read everything without saying anything for 20 minutes before looking up and saying quietly, "There's a case here, a real one." Lawrence found out on a Tuesday, not from Vivienne, from his sister Margaret, who had been told by the law firm, because one of the junior associates was the daughter of a woman who played golf with Margaret every second week in London, and the world, in Vivienne's experience, was very small when it wanted to be. He called Vivienne at 11 in the morning. She was at the foundation office. She stepped out of the meeting and took the call in the hallway. "What have you done?" he said. Not a question, a statement. The voice he used when something had gone wrong and he was deciding whose fault it was. "I found the letters in your filing cabinet," she said. "The ones from your mother." Silence. "You knew about her," Vivienne said. "About Kathleen, about all of it." "It was settled, years ago. There was an agreement. There was a payment," Vivienne said. $4,200, to a woman who had a sick child and no other options. "That's not an agreement, that's a transaction." More silence. Then "Vivienne, you don't understand the full picture." "No," she agreed, "I probably don't, but I understand enough." She looked at the wall of the hallway. A poster for the foundation's winter fundraiser, children's faces. "I understand that Petra Dowd's mother spent her whole life being made to feel like she didn't exist, and she died that way. And her daughter has been sleeping in a parking garage in the city where your family lives. And I understand that you knew. And I understand that I didn't know because you made sure of it." He started to say something. She didn't let him. "I'm not doing this to destroy you, Lawrence. I'm doing this because it's right. And because our daughter is watching." She ended the call and went back into the meeting. The legal process took time. It moved the way legal things move, slowly, carefully, with pauses that felt endless, and then accelerations that felt sudden. Petra retained Charlotte's firm. The estate claim pertained to historical assets and records dating back to the division of 1953, and while the statute of limitations had expired on the original fraud, what emerged through discovery was something that Dorothea had perhaps not anticipated when she sent that letter in 2006. Documentation. A lot of it. Records kept by Kathleen Dowd over 30 years. A second set of letters, found in a shoebox in the apartment in Dartmouth, that Petra had carried with her all the way to Halifax in the lining of a bag she'd bought at a church sale. Lawrence hired his own legal team. He and Vivienne had long, careful conversations in the evenings that felt less like arguments, and more like the slow dismantling of something that had been built under false pretenses. He was not a cruel man. That was what made it harder in some ways. He had simply done what his family had taught him, to protect the structure, to maintain the shape of things, to keep certain rooms locked and certain conversations unfinished. "Did you ever think about them?" Vivienne asked him one night. Kathleen, Petra. Whether they were all right. He was quiet for a long time. "I told myself it had been handled," he said. "That's not the same as thinking about them." He looked at his hands. "No," he said, "it isn't." The settlement was reached on a March morning that was cold and bright and smelled like the ocean coming off the harbor. It wasn't a large amount in Aldridge terms. It wasn't meant to be. What Petra had asked for, from the beginning in a Tim Hortons on Quinpool Road in October, was recognition. Documentation that Kathleen Aldridge Dowd was a legitimate descendant of Harland Aldridge, and had been wrongfully excluded from the family estate in 1953, and that the subsequent correspondence from Dorothea Aldridge had been intended to suppress that claim. A formal letter of acknowledgement from the Aldridge family estate. She got that. She got a financial settlement too, which Charlotte negotiated with the precision and the quiet relentlessness that Vivienne recognized from watching her daughter read as a child. Methodical, thorough, not showy, just exact. Lawrence signed everything. He was not happy, he was not peaceful about it, but he signed. Vivienne saw Petra for the last time on a Wednesday afternoon in early April. They met at the library again. It had become their place without either of them deciding it. The same table near the periodicals. Outside, the trees on Spring Garden Road were just beginning to change. There was a pale green to things that had been gray all winter. Petra had found a place to stay. A room in a house in Dartmouth, across the harbor, small but stable. She was working at a bakery on Portland Street. She'd cut her hair. The rubber band was gone. "You don't have to," Vivienne said. "I didn't expect." Petra stopped, started again. "I expected you to go home that day and decide it was too complicated. Most people decide it's too complicated." "I almost did," Vivienne admitted. "There were about 4 different moments when I almost decided it was too complicated." "What changed your mind?" Vivienne thought about the letter with the pencil note in the margin. The $4,200. The woman who had been sick and alone, and who had taken the money because there was nothing else, and who had been ashamed of it until the end of her life. "Your mother took money because she had to," she said. "And she spent the rest of her life feeling like she'd done something wrong. I didn't want that to be the last word." Petra looked out the window at the trees. "She would have liked you," she said. "I'd like to have known her." They sat there for a while after that, not saying much, just drinking coffee and watching the light change outside and letting the afternoon be what it was. Quiet, unhurried, ordinary. The kind of ordinary that comes after a long time of things not being ordinary at all. Lawrence and Vivienne did not divorce. That surprised some people and didn't surprise others. What they did was harder and stranger than divorce. They stayed and rearranged, slowly, with difficulty, with long conversations and longer silences, and with Charlotte, who came home for a full week in May, and who sat at the kitchen table with both of them and said, with the precise and unsentimental clarity that Vivienne had tried for 26 years to teach her, "You both have to decide what you're willing to be honest about from here, not to each other, to yourselves. Start there." Vivienne thought about that for a long time. She thought about all the things she had chosen not to look at over 23 years. The locked cabinet. The names not mentioned. The conversations turned sideways in drawing rooms and at dinner tables and over the phone, smoothly, efficiently, by people who had decided long ago that what was not spoken could not be used against you. She had lived inside that logic for a long time. She had breathed its air and slept in its house and worn its brooch on her coat lapel. She thought about a woman standing in a parking garage with a torn bag in both hands, asking in a level voice for something that was already going to be thrown away. She thought about the way Petra had looked at her, not through it seemed like such a small thing. It was not a small thing. It was in the end the only thing that had made any of it possible, that moment of really looking at something your life had trained you to walk past. She kept the brooch, not because she liked it, because she wanted to remember what it had been for, what it had opened, and what she had decided, standing in a library with a cup of coffee and a stranger who shared her last name, to do with whatever it opened next.